Welcome to video number 3 of our Advent series looking at the use of the Old Testament in Zechariah's song in Luke 1. Today, we're going to look at the next verse, basically. As I mentioned, the Old Testament is just infused throughout Zechariah's song. And so in almost every single verse, there's a reference to the Old Testament. So I'm going to just read verses 68 and 69 to you, and then we'll talk about the Old Testament reference that Zechariah makes. But he begins, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited and redeemed his people." We talked about that last time, where there's the Exodus language that Zechariah is pointing back to. And then it goes on, "and has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David." So David is our Old Testament reference today. And if you know your Old Testament well, you'll know that there were 3 major covenants made between God and the nation of Israel. So first, the most foundational one is the covenant with Abraham, which we'll talk about in a subsequent video. But then there's the Mosaic covenant, which formed Abraham's family into the nation of Israel. This occurred at Mount Sinai in Exodus 19. The third covenant, though, between God and the nation of Israel is the Davidic covenant, which was made with, as you probably guessed, David. So David was the second king of Israel. So after Saul is made the first king, Saul did not follow after God or seek after God, and so he is replaced with David. God describes David as a man after my own heart. So David sought the Lord, and after he became king, he desired to build a permanent temple for God. Now, when we think about why he wants to do this, we have to remember that the dwelling place of God previously, or at that time, was the tabernacle. So when Israel is freed from the land of Egypt, slavery, they go to Mount Sinai, where the Mosaic covenant takes place. And God gives instructions for building the tabernacle, which is where God's presence dwelled with his people. But the tabernacle was temporary because they build it and then they end up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. So they had to be able to move the tabernacle around. So they would have to build it and then take it down in a short amount of time and then carry it around with them. So the tabernacle was very much a temporary dwelling place. So David wants to build a permanent temple for God, which would be common, of course, in that era and in the ancient Near East, where they would build temples for their gods. But David wants to build a temple for the one true God, and specifically, he wants to build it in Jerusalem. Now, as David seeks the Lord about building this temple, God makes clear to him that rather than David building a house for God, or another word for a temple, God would actually build a house or a dynasty for David from his descendants. And God makes this promise to David in 2 Samuel 7. There's a few different components to this promise that I want us to look at. So I want to look at the passage from 2 Samuel 7 first, and I'm going to read it in full so we can better understand it. So it says this: "And I will make for you a great name." This is God talking to David, "like the name of the great ones on earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel and will plant them there, so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more. As from formerly, from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. And so this is the covenant with David that God makes, specifically that he will have a descendant on the throne forever, right? Your throne shall be established forever. Moreover, he says that David's son will build a house for God's name, and God will establish the throne of his kingdom. And sure enough, after David is king, his son Solomon becomes king and rules over the nation of Israel. Solomon then builds the temple for God, just as God had promised to David. But after Solomon dies, the nation divides. It divides into two different nations. If you remember, the kingdom of Israel is made up of 12 tribes, and the 10 northern tribes form the nation of Israel, and the 2 southern tribes form the nation of Judah. Now, the 2 southern tribes of Judah have the line of David is the king over them, whereas the 10 northern tribes of Israel, there are various families who rule over it. And we see this detailed in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. The kingdom of Judah has some 20 kings in total. Again, all descendants of David. And it appears as we read on in 1st and 2nd Kings that the covenant with David is fulfilled as his successors continue his royal dynasty, as king after king from David's line takes their turn on the throne. The problem is that most of the kings in David's line are wicked. They turn the people away from God and turn them toward the worship of idols rather than focusing on worshiping God. Only 8 of the 20 kings were good. 2 of those 8 kings, Hezekiah and Josiah, were outstanding kings. Their hearts were fully devoted to the Lord. They got rid of idols. They helped people focus on worshiping God. But because there are so many wicked kings, God eventually brings judgment on his people. Babylon conquers Judah and takes the nation into exile, takes the prominent people into exile, and leaves just a scattered remnant of the people. So David's line does not end in that Babylon kills all of David's family, but David's family is no longer on the throne as promised. And they are in exile in Babylon for 70 years. And so for 70 years, there is no Davidic ruler over the people, only the kings of Babylon, who are, of course, not of David's line. But the people of Judah eventually return from exile. And when they do, Zerubbabel leads them back. And Zerubbabel is actually from David's family line, and he serves as the governor over the reconstituted nation of Israel. But Zerubbabel rules under the authority of the Persian kings, Persia, who's now the dominant world power over Israel. And Zerubbabel ruling as governor is hardly what God had promised. After Zerubbabel, though, there are no more kings from David's line in any positions of authority. So what of the promise to David? It remains at the time of Luke unfulfilled for nearly 600 years. And it is in this context of a long unfulfilled promise that Zechariah's words ring out, that he blesses the Lord God of Israel because he has visited and redeemed his people and has raised up a horn of salvation from the house of his servant David. So the promise to David was delayed but not forgotten. Mary would give birth to a son, and Jesus would fulfill that promise to David from so long ago. Jesus's coming would reveal the fulfillment of the promise to David of always having one of his descendants on the throne. But unlike David and David's successors, Jesus's dominion would never end. His rule would be forever.